Hello, beautiful community. You're very welcome to this video in which we'll look at the looming mobilization in Russia. And that is cast against a big canvas in the background. And that canvas says a big war against the West, perhaps to come in years from now. The last video on this channel was a bit of a cold shower for a few people because we talked about the likelihood of Trump winning the presidency, and we talked about how the West's support for Ukraine is not commensurate with the Ukrainian victory. It's commensurate with what I call independence plus, which doesn't mean Ukraine won't win, but it just means that if Ukraine does win, that will not be a proportionate product of the support it's received. And that's all very important because as tough as that can feel to explore, the reality is that you're on an app that prioritizes, if you like, your lower instincts, right? It prioritizes what you want as opposed to what you really reflectively want. And we always have to buffer and self-protect ourselves against that because, the reality is that our more reflective concerns are ours too. In fact, there might be even more ours. So let's say a little bit about some of that, changing the subject now, some of that legislation that many of you would have read and heard being talked about that started moving in Russia, and what that means for the bigger picture of how the Kremlin's plans and prospects look. Now, one thing you would have heard about is the extension of the military service age, which is something that's going to occur eventually. And that means that it's no longer 18 to 27, it's 18 to 30. And right at the beginning of this process, the suggestion, and this is not my expertise here, so this is just an amateurish presumption, the lie was that the top age would be moved up and the bottom age would be moved up too. But there's a very natural gambit that the Kremlin engages in, which is to say, we're just going to go this far and we definitely won't go that next step. But once that first step is taken, and that second step follows. And not to over-dramatize this, but I do think that kind of change, formalized, would be available to the population. People would notice it, would think about it. I, as you know, didn't stay in the Soviet Union beyond 1990, but my memories from childhood are that, it would be good to get to 28 so I could skip military service and just get it out of the way. So that number is very well entrenched in Russian consciousness, and they're going to notice the difference. Then there were various other bits that you would have all heard about, to do with easing through the process of mobilization, and that includes holding people accountable more rapidly, holding organizations much more punitively accountable for covering people's backs and not wanting to cooperate with the mobilization process. But I think that the thing that you would have heard about the most is this business of local governors being given the possibility to put together their own military formations. So let's briefly analyze this. And to governors can create state-owned enterprises during mobilization, military emergencies, or wartime, to aid security forces in safeguarding the national borders, combating sabotage and reconnaissance groups, and illegal armed formations. So this is tactical stuff, and there is a balancing act between not giving too much power away with this move, but at the same time giving oneself the possibility to hold a governor's responsible. And that balancing act is produced, I think, in part by psychology of increasing fear about unforeseen eventualities. We've got to be prepared if that happens, and what if that and this happens, and that, I think, has escalated very much since the Prigozhin mutiny. A couple of remarks about the past mobilization, as it might look to the Kremlin, and about how they might be seeing Ukraine's counteroffensive. Just a couple of things to throw at the canvas here, nothing more. First, I think that there is the sense that the past mobilization, the September 2022 mobilization, got absorbed within a few months. And that's taken as an encouraging sign that the population just absorbed it and it's okay. And about Ukraine's counteroffensive, they think that if it continues to not make tremendous progress, then might it not be time for us to think about various kinds of pushes of our own? So there's a degree of optimism that perhaps military experts would tell us is unrealistic, but I think there might be a degree of optimism in the Kremlin's thinking about what they might be able to get up to if Ukraine's counteroffensive continues to stall, and they may be, I think, they may be overestimating the degree to which it might stall in reality. Now, just a brief word on Putin's strategy, because we've discussed this already very much. In my analysis, it is to, for the moment, minimalize the globalization and internationalization of the war, and then to escalate capacity and stability, allowing into a bigger war with the West. Then zooming out a little bit, here we've got to say that the Kremlin's dealing with a balance between a depoliticized population and a population that begins to become more politicized. And here there are questions about both the unpredictability of what happens if you politicize the population more, and the potential impotence of the Kremlin to politicize the population when it wants to. So it's possible that the lever will not yield much when it's pulled, or that when it yields some things, that these things may be also deleterious for the Kremlin. But it's this balance we're talking about between this depoliticized blob in the middle, which constitutes probably over half of the population, and a picture of greater activation, greater militarization of society. And when you ask people, well, is Russia, fascist? I think probably the majority of experts of different kinds might say it's not. But then there are those who would say that it is, except, of course, for this bit of the population, right? We do not have a country with a fascist-sized population. And I'm not going to arbitrate between these two ways of describing Russia, whether I'd go there myself or not. I think it's a perfectly plausible thing to say that there are significant fascist features there. And then that final zoom out might be to say that, we've got this picture of a country that is clearly an empire. It's engaged in colonial enterprises, but it itself feels colonized vis-a-vis the West. Now, we talked a little bit about this in our video on evil on the main channel. But this is not just a propaganda trick. There are deep historical and social forces that have brought about a situation where Russia feels in a certain way trodden upon and dependent, and normatively dependent on the West. So we've got a picture of a society that is a colonizer, but also that is viscerally perceives itself as being colonized. And plenty of other people talk about this much more articulately. This is not my expertise to give a lecture on this. But nevertheless, what we can undoubtedly say is that this colonized aspect of Russian colonialism is a powerful force that can spur on a sufficient social energies for war, for the perpetuation of war. And about this, I'm sure we'll talk more. For the moment, lots of love, and talk very soon.